Alright, before you question my averageness as a gamer, take a good look at how my first playthrough of Elden Ring went.
Yes, so?
And I used Moonveil and a cold Uchi.
Right this way. Sorry to keep you waiting.
So now that I've established how average I am, could someone like me, who's only beat Elden Ring once, do it again at level 1? Now, I know what you're thinking.
But Justin, you can trivialize this game even at level 1.
Yeah, I know that. Also, shut up. This is not going to be a playthrough of me finding every exploit and cheesing my way through the game. Now, that doesn't mean I won't be using helpful items like talismans, wondrous physics, and whatever else, but it does mean I will be fighting bosses myself with my own skill. That also means no summons. Now, let's begin. To start off, we gotta choose the Wretch, as this is the only class that begins at level 1, and the character I'm playing today is someone that I think truly exemplifies starting from the bottom. No talent, no skill in anything, but perhaps through hard work and dedication can become an Elden Lord. Honestly though, I just thought it looked funny. After creating my beautiful character, I got into the game, got my cheeks clapped by a tutorial boss, got told I was maidenless, got told I was maidenless again, and finally I had my trusty steed. After picking up the Flask of Wondrous Physic in the first half of the Dectus Medallion, I headed to Fort Faroth in Caelid for the second half, and also one of the best talismans for a level 1 run, Radagon's Sword Seal. This talisman adds 5 points to your character's vigor, endurance, strength, and dexterity. It also makes you receive 15% more damage, but in a level 1 run, this is basically a necessity. After getting the talisman, I decided to pick up Somber Smithing Stones 8 and 9 since they were in the area. Then I headed straight to Liurnia using the side road next to Stormveil Castle, picked up the Dexterity Knot Crystal Tier for some extra damage, talked to a conspiracy theorist for Somber Stones 1 through 4, got the Opaline Bubble Tier, which will help me not get one shot, and now it was time to get my weapon for this playthrough, the Ornamental Straight Sword. Wait, that weapon looks kind of familiar. I feel like I've seen it. Oh. So yes, I chose Violence with the Grafted Scion. One thing I noticed pretty quickly is he has a pretty long range, so I had to really mind my spacing. But after observing him a while, I also noticed he has a few attacks that can be easily punished with the jumping heavy, like his screaming attack and a few of his stabby moves. Overall, he was a challenging but manageable boss, and I beat him in 12 attempts and got the Ornamental Straight Sword. Now, I chose this weapon for a few reasons. 1, it's a somber weapon, so easier upgrades. 2, two-handing it gives you a unique moveset. 3, its weapon skill is called Golden Tempering, which gives 100 holy damage buff and also 3 new heavy attacks. And the 4th, and arguably most important reason, it looks cool. Before I continue, let me explain how I'll be upgrading the weapons I use in this playthrough. Basically, I'll be following this recommended level guide for each area unless I state otherwise. So for Morgott, since he's in Stormhill, I can either keep my weapon at the base level or +1. For Godric, since he's in Stormveil Castle, +1 or +2, and so on and so forth. Now it was time for the first major boss, Morgott. For some context, on my first playthrough of Elden Ring, I beat Morgott on my second try. Not because I was good at the game, but because I was overleveled and basically just brute forced my victory. So this time felt like I was actually fighting him for the very first time. I didn't understand any of his timings, his combos, the different variations of his attacks, so yeah, it was hard. Morgott has a ton of delayed attacks, but they teach you that in order to beat this game, you cannot panic roll, or else you're gonna get hit. Also, this knife move is just wrong. I got hit by it so many times. But yeah, most of my attempts went something like this. Use Golden Tempering for extra damage, use my heavy attack after an opening, and rinse and repeat. And after 20 attempts, I finally beat him and gained a valuable talisman slot. After beating Morgott, I invaded Stormveil Castle and somehow got through the front gate very easily. And now it was time for the second major boss, Godric. Well, after my first attempt went poorly, I remembered I had another talisman slot, so I opted for the Blue Dancer Charm, which increases my physical damage with lower equip load. And since I was doing a naked build for a good portion of the run, this would give me an easy 14% damage boost. So with the new talisman equipped, I returned to Godric and honestly kinda clapped his cheeks. His melee attacks do have a lot of range, but I just maintained distance for those. His overhead attacks were easy to dodge and punish. You can jump his Earthquake attack if you time it properly, and he honestly gives you a lot of free hits transitioning into phase 2. So yeah, I beat him in 3 attempts and I was ready for the next major area, the Academy of Raya Lucaria. But before I went to fight the next boss, I first had to take a little detour. At the bottom of this big elevator, there is an abductor virgin. Definitely doesn't seem like his first time though, but he abducts you and drops you into a late game area called Volcano Manor. If you've seen some challenge runs for Elden Ring, this is an easy This is an easy and early way to get Somber Stones 5 and 6. Well, number 7 is here too, but we'll talk about that later. So after grabbing those, I headed back to Raya Lucaria for the next boss, the Red Wolf of Radagon. And just like Godric, this boss was not too bad either. I was doing good damage, most of the spells were easy to dodge, minus a few. Some of his biting attacks did give me trouble though, but I got the timing down and was finally able to beat him in 6 attempts. After that, it was time for the real boss of Raya Lucaria, the Carrion Knight. Not really, but man, I hate this dude. Oh, frick! My knee! Anyways, it was time for the actual next boss, Rennala. Phase 1 was simple for the most part, but sometimes I would get caught by her crazy homing attack and it would instantly one-shot me. But besides that, the real fight started in Phase 2. This lady would not sit still. Most of the time, I was just running at her because she was always casting her magic and floating back. Dodging her magic wasn't too difficult since I could usually just outrun them by running to the side, but getting caught with even one move was usually death, so I had to play almost perfectly. Not to mention she starts summoning enemies halfway through her second phase. This made phase 2 last so long, since I would just run away from the summons and end up getting further and further from her. But no matter how cringy she was playing, I was determined to play at any pace for the victory, and I finally beat her. It only took 9 attempts, but it honestly felt much longer since each attempt lasted so long. So yeah, with 2 demigods defeated, I went to the round table hold for my 3rd talisman pouch and also upgraded my ornamental straight sword to +6. The next area was the Altus Plateau, which was an early late game area, so I wanted some more defense and decided to get the Dragon Crest Shield Talisman, which gave me a 10% boost to physical defense. But looking back on it now, this talisman didn't make a difference at all for the next boss, the Draconic Tree Sentinel. And man, literally everything was one-shotting me. This was also the start of a common pattern. Most of the bosses from this point on would take 30 attempts or more, and this boss was no exception. My cheeks were officially getting clapped. Phase 1 was difficult by itself because of his strange attack timings, but geez, Phase 2 was even worse with his new lightning attacks. In my first playthrough, I didn't have much issue with this lightning attack he does, but for some reason, I got hit by this a lot. I think the combination of knowing it was a one-shot and at the same time knowing that it was a relatively easy move to dodge was getting to me. But anyways, after many attempts, I had learned his moveset and I just needed one attempt where I really focused and minimized my risks. And finally, after 32 tries, I beat him and I could now enter Leyndell, the royal capital. In the capital, there was one talisman I was dying to get, one that would make a huge difference in the boss fights, the Ritual Shield Talisman. This talisman reduces any damage taken by 30% when you're at full health, so I now had a much higher chance of surviving one-shot attacks. This essentially allowed me to tank as many hits as I had flasks of Crimson Tears, which immensely increased my survivability. So, with the new talisman in hand, I went to fight the next boss, Godfrey, and the talisman was already putting in work. None of his moves were one-shotting me, and I actually almost managed to beat him on my first try. No! Quick little tip for this boss, you can actually jump his foot slam and hit him with an attack of your own. Pretty cool. Overall, it didn't take long to memorize Godfrey's patterns, and he was down in a total of 6 attempts. So after Godfrey, the next mandatory boss was Morgott, but there was still a problem I had not yet addressed. Remember when I mentioned Somberstone 7 that was at Volcano Manor? Yeah, I still didn't have that. So I went through the Volcano Manor questline by talking to the Snake Girl and Marika's Tits guy, yada yada yada, and there it was, the Somber 7. Except, there were only 2 choices to get it. Make this insanely hard jump that was patched out of the game, or beat the boss that was blocking my path, the Godskin Noble. I chose to fight the Godskin Noble, and also since I'm apparently a masochist, I decided to fight him with parries. This fight was rough, but after a few attempts, the parries were actually working out. He had 2 moves I could consistently parry, his jump-in sword thrust and his fist slam attack. So this was my strategy. Land a parry, hit him with a heavy attack as he's getting up, and repeat until I beat him. But alas, nothing in life is that easy, and anytime I mistimed or misspaced a parry, I was dead. But still, I was making progress and I would get him to phase 2 somewhat frequently. But even in phase 2, I couldn't last very long because of one move in particular. It was not his rolling attack, though that one was also pretty annoying, but his quick thrusting attack. I died to this so many times. I just could not recognize the move in time since it came out so quickly. I wasn't about to quit though. I needed that Somber 7, and after 34 attempts, I told myself I would give it one more try before I ended my stream. Yes! Yes, let's go! I was so happy to end my stream like that. I went and bragged to my wife afterwards. And of course she didn't really care, but you know, at least she listened. So yes, I finally got my Somber 7, but I decided to save the upgrade for after beating the next boss, Morgott. And oh man, my foolish ambitions were put to rest, baby. Immediately, I noticed how he was basically just an evolved form of Morgott. His moves are hard to react to, he has his classic delays, he has long combos, and he seemed to not have many openings. The moves that I struggled with the most were either his delayed horizontal slice or his running spear attack. But honestly, I was dying to literally everything. After 19 attempts, I did get him to a short-lived phase 2, but I felt like I was getting used to him. And dare I say, I was having fun too. Finding the openings for Morgott were immensely satisfying, and my favorite opening would definitely have to be his flip attack. When he would flip towards me, I would roll with him and immediately do one light attack and then roll away. If I didn't roll with him at the right moment, there wouldn't be enough time to land a hit and he would do another flip to punish me. I don't know why this move in particular was so satisfying, but I think it was the amount of risk and the proper timing required. But yeah, after a total of 32 attempts, I finally got it. With Morgott firmly clapped and disrespected, it was time to enter the mountaintops of the giants for the next boss. Oh boy, Fire Giant. To put it bluntly, this was a huge struggle and probably my least favorite boss of this run. Fire Giant's health pool is insanely large, and I instantly felt how weak I was. Also, while his fire attacks were pretty easy to manage, I kept dying to his physical attacks that were all instant one-shots. I did utilize the iframes from Unmounting Torrent, which did save me a lot, but still, I couldn't get the hang of the fight. I would get him to phase 2 every now and then, but kept dying to his seemingly random rolling attack. And after about 30 attempts, this fight was honestly getting to me, and I found myself at a crossroads. Do I stick to my rules of getting good, or break them and add a little cheese to my diet? I ate the cheese. So with the help of my chat, I decided to try out the Antspur Rapier, which can be obtained after beating an invader next to Shaded Castle in the Altus Plateau. This weapon inflicts Scarlet Rot, which by itself is great, but it could also be infused. And so, why not make the Fire Giant bleed a little too? But there was an issue. The Antspur Rapier required 20 dex to use, and I only had 15 with Radagon's Source Seal. I needed the Prosthesis Wearer Heirloom, which gives 5 additional dex. I could get this talisman from doing Millicent's questline, only problem was I had to beat another boss to progress the quest, Commander O'Neill. But at this point, I was pretty committed to the cheese, so I just lured him out of his arena and sentenced him to death by bathing. Basically, you can get him to stand in the Scarlet Rock geysers and it'll eventually kill him. So with Commander O'Neill out of the way, I returned to Millicent to get the talisman and could finally try out the Antspur Rapier. The base damage was worse than the ornamental straight swords, mainly because my rapier wasn't as upgraded, but the Scarlet Rot and bleed damage were helping the fight go a lot quicker, and I was getting him to phase 2 about every other attempt. As an added bonus, my chat told me about the Lance Talisman, which increases damage by 15% while on horseback. Perfect for this fight. With the combination of my new weapon and talisman, I was getting closer and closer, and it was just a matter of time. Ah! I didn't have to fight this boss ever again. But that moment of bliss was soon replaced with despair as I was transported to crumbling Ferrum Azula. The Godskin Duo was next. This was one fight in the back of my mind that I was dreading, but after beating the Godskin Noble at Volcano Manor, I felt a weird sense of optimism and confidence. I thought since I could parry the fatty, I'd just focus on him and beat them this way. Yeah, it did not go that way at all. While going for parries was viable, with the damage I was doing, I would have to land 15 to 20 successful parries in order to win. And on top of that, if I lost track of the skinny one, I would usually get caught by a fireball or a stray attack. After about 15 attempts, I decided to try out rot arrows, and while the extra damage was helping, it was still a very inconsistent source of damage. I needed a better solution, and that's when I came up with this. Since I still wanted to use parries, I opted for the weapon with the highest crit damage in the game, the Misericord. With 40% more crit damage compared to most weapons, this would make my parries more worthwhile. Then I grabbed the Hoarfrost Stomp Ash of War and put it on the Misericord for extra frost damage, and also upgraded it to plus 22. I still wanted a bit more damage though, and decided to use Kukris to proc bleed during the Fatty's rolling attack. Now, you might be thinking, even with this new weapon and the Kukris, I'm still heavily relying on parries. Well, there was one final piece to my new build. Carrion Retaliation. This is an Ash of War for shields that allows you to parry magic attacks and replace them with 3 glint blades that attack your enemy. Perfect for parrying the Godskin Duo's Black Flame attacks. This would give me very consistent damage and, funnily enough, still carry the spirit of parrying in a way. After changing my build, I beat them in 5 attempts. I was really proud of my final strategy and felt like I played outside the box for this one. So, with Godskin Duo defeated, I ventured forward and the next boss legitimately made me want to quit this run. The Beast Clergyman / Malekith. Oh my gosh, this was absolute pain. All of his moves were quick and confusing. He had so many variations of the same move, so the timings were all different. I'm looking at you, Bestial Sling. I hate you. I experimented a bit and switched between my Cold Misericord and Anspar Rapier for the status effects, but I kept missing so many hits because my weapons were too short. To counteract this, I decided to try out the Uchi Katana since it has a longer range, and I put a cold infusion on it. It was definitely hitting more often than my previous weapons, but at this point, it didn't matter what weapon I was using. I just needed to get good. After about 40 attempts, I finally got him to his second phase for the first time, and I quickly learned the fight was just getting started. I needed to learn Phase 2. To help me get to Phase 2 more consistently, I changed up my talismans to nearly all defense and health related ones, including the Dragon Crest Shield Talisman +2, which can be picked up on the way to Malekith, and also the Crimson Amber Medallion +1 that's in Volcano Manor. This was actually a huge help, and I was getting to Phase 2 much more often now. But there was one move in Phase 2 I could not figure out how to dodge. I didn't know what to do. I had fought Malekith about 90 times at this point, and honestly, I thought this was the end of my run. No boss had pushed me this far. But at the same time, no other boss motivated me as much either. I had to beat him. And so I decided to practice off stream and watch some videos on how to handle Malekith. Thankfully, I finally learned how to dodge his massive AoE. I just had to run to the left side as soon as I saw him doing the attack. Also, a lot of people highly recommended getting the Blasphemous Claw, which lets you parry some of Malekith's Phase 2 attacks. I won't go into the details, but to get this item, I had to beat Rykard and Bernal, and then Bernal drops the item. Malekith has 3 moves you can parry, which are indicated by a yellow light that emits from his sword. Thankfully, the parry timing wasn't too difficult and the reward was extremely worth it. I would get about 6 seconds to wail on him, and this was usually enough to inflict frostbite. Eventually, I was able to consistently get the parries, and the next day I streamed again. Did my practice pay off? And I'm happy to say it did. And after a grand total of about 140 attempts, I finally beat Malekith. This was by far the hardest boss in the run so far. So with that victory, I felt confident I could finish the run. With Malekith out of the way, the next boss was Gideon. And I was kind of scared of this one because I knew he was a filthy magic spammer. And if I didn't beat him on the first try when he monologues... So, after a few more tries of toxic PvP, I decided to get the Haligdrake Talisman +2 for a 20% boost to holy damage defense. It honestly didn't help that much for this fight since I could only tank one of his Destructo discs anyways, but it would come in handy for a boss coming up soon. I knew that I had to play aggressive against Gideon since you can stagger lock him, but because of his constant magic spam, it was hard to get close to him. But if I committed to playing aggressive from the beginning, I knew I could do it, and so That's what I did. I was able to bleed him a few times and put Scarlet Rot on him. When he was close to dying, I decided to run away and throw kukris at him to finish him off. He deserved all of my disrespect. Good riddance. Now it was time for one of my favorite bosses of this run, Godfrey the First Chad. I say he's one of my favorites because I feel like Godfrey is one of the most honest boss fights. You don't die from some move that doesn't make any sense. You die because you messed up. Honestly, I didn't have much trouble at all during his first phase. I was reacting well to all of his attacks and felt pretty comfortable dodging everything. One thing I really took advantage of was the fact that a lot of his slamming moves and big AoEs can be dodged by just timing your jump, which also lets you hit him. So on my first try, I got him to phase 2 pretty easily. But man, phase 2. It was like being in a bar fight with a professional wrestler, MMA fighter, and boxer all at the same time. If I managed to dodge something, it was pure luck, and I knew I had to learn phase 2 the hard way by dying over and over again. One mistake I noticed I kept doing in phase 2 was keeping too much distance from Godfrey during his grounded attacks. I knew why I was doing this. I was terrified of him. But if I had just run or rolled to either of his sides, I could have avoided most of his grounded attacks. But after learning that, I was lasting a lot longer in phase 2. This fight was just pure trial and error, and after 46 attempts, I finally beat him. I was so nervous during my last attempt because I got a bleed and a stagger at the same time, and I didn't want to waste that precious opportunity. But hey, it worked out. Yes! 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 After beating Godfrey, I was so happy, but at the same time, I knew what pain was waiting for me. The final boss. Or should I say bosses? But hey, let's talk about the first final boss for now, Radagon. I hate him. I hate him. Why doesn't he let me heal? You would think if he hasn't hit you in like 5 seconds, he would let you heal, right? Nope. He's a dirty, input reading son of a... Anyways, let's talk about Radagon. Initially, I wanted to parry him, but it was definitely not worth it since I needed to land 3 parries to get a riposte, and that was way too inconsistent. So I changed up my strategy and found that Radagon is weakest to strike and fire damage. After learning this, I decided to power stance a Mace and Morningstar and add fire infusions. Safe to say, I was doing pretty good damage. Oh yeah, and for this fight, I definitely needed the Haligdrake Talisman +2. It was just enough to help me survive his Holy Spear move. Radagon's first phase is honestly not too bad, but once phase 2 starts, oh, it really starts. I got used to all of his new moves after a few attempts, but there was one move that I absolutely despised. Why does the teleport have a hitbox, Miyazaki? Why? The timing is just so hard to get used to, especially since he strings it together with his melee attacks, which messes up the dodging rhythm. And to top it all off, if you get hit by the teleport and he follows up with this one specific attack, you're dead, because the teleport stun locks you. And even though this didn't happen a lot, it still happened enough to really frustrate me. One good thing I did notice though, I guess, was that Radagon has a few openings where I could get him with a charged heavy, which helped quicken the fight a bit. And after 50 painful attempts, I finally beat Radagon. But this was no time to celebrate. Enter Elden Beast, final boss number 2. Unlike some other games in the Souls series where you can carry your progression in a multi-part final boss, if I wanted a chance at Elden Beast, I would have to beat Radagon again. This sucked. But after this point, I was comfortable enough with Radagon and I was making it to Elden Beast about every 3 to 4 attempts. Now let's talk about Elden Beast. In the beginning of the fight, he always starts with the Flame Breath, and this was a perfect chance to land about 5 jumping attacks. And that's about all I knew at this point, so I just treated my first few attempts as learning opportunities. Painful learning opportunities. And you know what I learned? I really wanted Bloodhound Step. I honestly felt a tiny bit dirty using this, but I was too mentally drained to care. Here's how my fights went before Bloodhound Step. No! No. And here's how my fights went after putting on Bloodhound Step. Dude! Yeah, that was just a bad dodge, but it was helping for sure. See, look, I got him to half, but still, it wasn't enough, and 6 hours and 110 attempts later, I ended my stream feeling defeated. But with the feeling of defeat came another feeling of motivation, just like with Malekith, and I decided to play off stream. I was getting close, like really close. Also, I do want to talk about Elden Beast's most infamous move, Elden Stars. It's basically an unavoidable projectile that follows you around for 20 seconds and constantly does damage to you. Definitely an issue for a level 1 character like me. But thankfully, there was a solution. The Crimson Whirl Bubble Tier. This Crystal Tier's effect lasted for 15 seconds and converted any incoming damage into HP. 15 seconds was 5 seconds less than the duration of Elden Stars, but if I delayed drinking it for a few seconds, then I was good to go. So with the strategy for Elden Stars, I was getting more and more comfortable with the fight, and it was only a matter of time until my victory.
Oh, yes! I did it. I'm done.
After a total of 659 deaths, I had done it. I actually beat Elden Ring at level 1 by getting good. This was definitely one of, if not the hardest gaming achievement I had ever done, and I was so happy it was over. If you want to see all the raw footage of my run, I streamed about 95% of it on this channel, so check out the live tab if you want. Also, check out my other videos of my regular Souls game playthroughs. I guarantee you'll enjoy them. Maybe. Guarantee is a strong word.